Hello Zero Books readers. In this video we're going to answer the question, what would happen if every worker in America were to win $1 million in the lottery? We're going to answer this question even though it's kind of a silly thought experiment. In order to examine the idea of economic determinism and to overthrow some of the simple ideas that collect around that. The idea of economic determinism is used to describe a lot of different things. For instance, people who are committed to redistributionist fantasies, like Andrew Yang with his universal basic income scheme, might be called an economic determinist. People who believe that capitalism will simply collapse on its own or defeat itself might be called economic determinists. And also those people who are like myself, who think that the functions of the economy, the logic of capitalism, is determinative of what happens in society in the last analysis, are also called economic determinists. And I'm going to look at this question about the lottery and look at some other things as well in order to distinguish the kind of economic determinism that I advocate from these kind of straw man versions. Before we ask ourselves the question, what would happen if every worker in America were to win $1 million? Let's consider a slightly different question. Namely, why is it that most lottery winners end up having miserable lives? Chaunceton Bird's upcoming novel, Malibu, Motel, starts with the claim that money, easy money, really is the solution to the problems life throws at you. The book's protagonist, Case Calloway, writes, "Money can buy happiness. Money is happiness. Money gives happiness a run for its money. Don't let the poor tell you differently. Enough money can buy long-lasting comfort, security, and liberty. People just don't realize how much happiness costs." The book is based on the true story of a real-life lottery winner named James Hayes. Hayes won $19 million from the California Super Lotto in 1998, and during his 2017 trial for bank robbery, his lawyer explained what had happened. Hayes was a victim of the lottery curse, and lost his bearings in life before turning to bank robbery to support his drug habit. Perhaps not too surprisingly, this lottery curse idea seems to have some empirical evidence to support it. A 2015 study published in the journal Health Economics found that while winning big does indeed improve mental health, there are counteracting health effects with respect to risky behaviors. Those who win more on the lottery smoke more and engage in more social drinking, both of which are likely detrimental to health. While it's generally true that rich people are healthier than poor people, this truism doesn't seem to hold up for people who win the lottery. But let's say that winning the lottery did work for most people. Let's say that $1 million would always be enough to provide the good life, regardless of what your original circumstances were. Still, this idea that we could have a just society if economic inequality was undone through massive redistribution, that is, through a process where every working class person in America received not $1,000 a month, but $1 million up front, would still be daft. What would happen if we gave $1 million to the 160 million workers in the United States? We should first realize that redistribution of cash money wouldn't work. There's currently $10.5 trillion in existence, and only $1.2 trillion in actual paper money or cash. This means that in order to pay out the $1 million to each worker, the US government would have to print more money or generate more dollars electronically. This would, of course, bring on inflation, if not hyperinflation, which means that $1 million would end up being less money after the payout than it was before. If, on the other hand, we were to use a time machine to go back and set up a circumstance wherein every worker would have $1 million in the bank because they'd earned it, we would still, by the logic of capitalism, end up in a situation where that $1 million didn't mean very much. Because if every worker were able to earn $1 million a year, that would mean that the capitalists would have to be earning magnitudes more than that, which would again mean that the value of the dollar would decline as workers earned more. That is, given that the wages of workers equals the price of the commodities needed for the worker to live to work another day, then if every worker were to make at least $1 million a year, that would mean that $1 million would amount to a subsistence wage. The problem of vulgar redistributionist economism isn't its economism, but its failure to fully work through the logic of the economy. The problem with redistributionist schemes for equality is that they aren't economistic enough. The sort of economism or economic determinism that I embrace makes neither of these mistakes, or I hope it doesn't. I don't think that people's problems can be solved through taxation and adequate redistribution, not only because I realize that racism, sexism, and other cultural difficulties would remain, but also because under capitalism, true material security and success doesn't arise through the mere having of a large sum of money, although that does help, but rather through the use of money to create commodities for exchange in the market. That is, it is only by successfully investing in capital of one kind or another that one can not merely hold on to a hoard of cash or enjoy some momentary consumption, but rather grow wealthier. It is only by participating in and winning the game of abstract value production that one can stride with confidence across the earth. To understand what value is for Marx, I want to turn to a different theory. Now, the following explanation risks introducing a new confusion, a new wholly different theoretical difficulty, as it attempts to explain through analogy. But I hope that one way to understand the economic determinism that I support and that can rightly be attributed to Marx's critique of political economy is to consider this other theory from film studies that is also sometimes called reductionist and derided for its universalism, namely suture theory. According to an essay posted by Professor Bob Nolan at the University of Wisconsin, in film theory, the term suture refers to the processes by which we are stitched into the story world or fabric of a film, the processes by which we are drawn into the film, taking up positions as subjects such that we experience the film world as an enclosed world unto itself, and such that we make sense of and respond to what the film represents as we are encouraged to do so by the film itself. The classic example of a suture in film is the reverse shot sequence wherein a character is seen looking in one direction, apparently at another character, and then the other character is seen looking the opposite direction, apparently looking back. The reason this is a suture is because the sequence brings the audience in as their own position outside the cinema frame becomes represented in the frame. Classic shot-reverse shot is not the only way to achieve the suture effect either. As the film theorist Odar described it in his essay, the ideal chain of a suture discourse would be one which is articulated into figures which it is no longer appropriate to call shot-reverse shot, but which mark the need so that the chain can function for an articulation of the space such that the same portion of space be represented at least twice, in the filmic field and in the imaginary field. This scene from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory might be an example of what Odar was getting at, as the reverse shot isn't singular, but rather is a montage of shots that fills in the imaginary field that the audience was positioned within as Wonka and his guests originally entered the frame. Understanding the idea of suture can lead to a diverse array of film interpretations. For instance, the feminist theorist Laura Mulvey referred to the idea of the suture in order to argue that women serve a particular ideological function in Hollywood films, namely that they are the figures of scopophilic pleasure in a cinema that is defined by what she called the male gaze. Whereas the film critic and philosopher Slavoj Žižek refers to the cinematic suture as he makes his usual argument about the necessity of error in cognition, and as he points out the necessary gap between subject and object that he claims the cinematic suture only obscures, but does not overcome. The concepts of suture and gaze are central to the explanations psychoanalytic film theorists give when discussing the effects of individual films. It is possible to abandon these notions and still do something like film theory, but in doing so, one would also abandon many other claims that these theorists make. For instance, that films are ideological in character. If you abandon the idea of suture, you have to either develop a new theory of ideology, one that is not psychoanalytic in character, or abandon film theory as it has come to be known. What I'm saying about the notion of suture, with some hesitation, I want to restate about Marx's notion of value with confidence. Value production determines how society functions in much the same way that suture determines the ideological effect of a film, with varying levels of success and in conjunction with many other influences and practices playing a role. For the psychoanalytic film theorist, the position of the camera and the decisions made in editing are not everything that matters in filmmaking, but these camera movements and editing decisions do, in the last analysis, determine the ideological effect of the film. Perhaps neither value theory nor suture theory are true, but when we give up on economic determinism, the kind that can rightly be attributed to Marx, when we reject that the mode of production in a capitalist society is what determines what happens in society in the last analysis, then we turn away from Marx's critique of capitalism and thus Marx's understanding of socialism as well. Are you listening? Do you understand what I'm saying? Thanks for watching this Zero Books video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to this channel and click on the notifications bell so that you'll be alerted whenever we release a new video. You should also consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons get access to our Inside Zero Books podcast every week and can get access to the Zero Books Book Club and help us to continue making online content from the left.